Good afternoon. Welcome to Policy Matters. I'm your host, Dustin Goverlow. It's taken a few weeks, but we finally have a way for you to get a hold of us. We've got a new website, and you can visit that website at policymatters.us. We've got a forum section. You can get on there and talk about the issues that are going on, whether we're talking about them on our show or just in general. We'd like you to keep them North Dakota specific, but you can talk about whatever you want. We also have an email address. You can get a hold of me at radio@policymatters.us. And if you would like to talk to me, my office phone number is 701-390-9231. On the show today, we have State Senate Minority Leader Mac Schneider. Mac is a Democrat out of Grand Forks. Good afternoon, Mac. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dustin. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about a few things because we're coming up on the conventions for both parties and the major contentious issue that really is one of the few things that actually has a lot to do with actual policy and not just politics, and that is the infrastructure funding in the western part of the state. And you and your party have been calling for some time for a special session to deal with the issue of infrastructure spending and the needs of western North Dakota. And so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to, introduce what you're proposing to do and dig a little bit deeper into it and see what you really want to see happen out of this special session that you have called for.
Yeah, I think it's time to address the infrastructure needs that are changing rapidly and multiplying out in western North Dakota. And this is, kind of a different iteration of the same old song and dance. We've been behind the power curve when it comes to addressing oil impacts ever since the boom started. And I guess some of that is forgivable, at least when the boom first started to arise here in North Dakota. We've never seen anything like it before. Well, now we know that at least to some extent this boom is here to stay, and we haven't done nearly enough to keep up with the rising demands on our infrastructure, on our schools, on housing. And so these problems are only going to get more difficult to address if we wait until 2015. And so that's why Representative Onstead and I and Senator John Warner, a Democrat from western North Dakota, that is why we did ask the governor to respectfully consider a special session to address these needs in western North Dakota. That call has been joined by people of both parties and no party at all, for all I know. And so I don't see this as a partisan issue. I see it as a North Dakotans taking care of their neighbors issue. And I hope that we will go in for a brief, tightly focused special session to address these needs in the most beautiful part of our state.
Now, a few weeks ago, we had Curtis Junt on the show, and he is a private business owner and is heavily involved in the oil industry. And he suggested that if we have a special session, that the legislature should look at how it could create a mechanism to not need a special session to deal with Western issues again. I believe that something like that would require probably a constitutional amendment because it would involve the issue of a subset of the legislature making decisions, and that is assuming that a solution beyond just letting the Industrial Commission and the Emergency Commission come in and make decisions and allot them a pile of cash to work with prior to leaving. But what do you think of that concept of creating some sort of a mechanism outside of the current structure that would, going forward, address this problem as we go in a more of a real-time manner rather than trying to play catch-up every 2 years?
Yeah, procedurally, we do have the budget section and the Emergency Commission, which do a limited number of things on an interim basis in between legislative sessions. But as important as the procedure is, I think it's much more critical to address the substance. I think if western North Dakota communities were allowed to keep a greater share of the oil production tax, which is supposed to be a tax that's levied in lieu of property taxes on oil, I think that would address the substance of the crisis, negating the calls for a special session. And so it's a pretty basic proposition. I don't mean to oversimplify things, but if these oil-impacted communities are allowed to keep a greater share of the oil revenue that is generated in that part of the state to address impacts where they arise, I think you probably wouldn't be hearing us call for a special session. So that really is the heart of the matter. I know there's some concern about whether we can get an appropriate formula done during the interim, during a special session. I say let's do our level best to get a proper oil production sharing formula in place between now and 2015. And if we overshoot it or undershoot it, we can address it then. But if we do nothing, we know for a fact these problems are only going to be more challenging to address. So I respect Mr. Junt's comments about changing things procedurally, but I do think that if we address the substance, we're not going to need special sessions. We're not going to see calls for that because these oil-impacted communities are going to keep a greater share of the oil revenue that's rightfully theirs.
Do you think that it is even possible to come up with a plan or a formula to fix the situation going forward in a constrained, say, 5 or 6 day special session?
I think it would be a challenge. I don't discount that notion at all. What I think you could do with the right leadership is have the governor convene a meeting of locally elected leaders in Western North Dakota, business leaders in Western North Dakota, legislators of both parties, including the legislative leadership, and sit down and have a summit. Maybe it takes a day, maybe it takes 2 days, but try to agree at least on the broad contours of the appropriate way to share this oil revenue that we've seen so much of in the last several years. And I think if you had some sort of predicate summits like that, you could clear away a lot of the brush and get into Bismarck focused and ready to go. And I would like us to not have the perfect be the enemy of the good here. Anything that we do during a special session, again, if we undershoot or overshoot the mark, we can readdress that in 2015. But what we can't readdress are the challenges that we're facing right now and that are just getting tougher and tougher to deal with as time goes by. So we don't have to be perfect. We just need to act.
And has there been enough legwork in the interim for a special session to do anything of substance? You know how the process is, and sometimes when there's not enough discussion of potential solutions in the interim, nothing gets done. And do you think that even if you had the ability to get that special session in place and convince the governor to call that, has enough background and legwork been done to start getting down to business in a special session?
Yeah, fair question. And I think if all we did was go into the special session and lift the sunset clause from House Bill 1358, that would be of benefit to Western North Dakota. We could do that likely in a morning. I think both parties recognize that that is something that was a mistake that could be undone relatively easily as long as all of us are in Bismarck to vote on it. I think we could replenish the Housing Incentive Fund. I think that, again, has broad bipartisan support, that this has been a program that has helped foster the construction of affordable housing. The fund right now is bone dry, and we're about halfway through the biennium, a little bit more than that. And so there's a range of good that can be accomplished if we did have a special session. Are we going to be able to accomplish, solve all the problems that are facing Western North Dakota in a special session? I think not, but I would like to see us at least do some catch-up so we can go into next session ready to think ahead and ready to do some long-range planning. So I don't think there's any question that we could benefit Western North Dakota if we had a special session. The question is, how far can we go when we're not willing to have a special session that lasts weeks or months? And I don't think we should, but I do think we should get together, address some of these problems that everybody agrees need to be addressed, and then, if we're not perfect, that's okay. We're human, and we're going to be back in session in 2015.
And shortly after you made your official request to the governor for the special session, Vicki Steiner, who's also a Republican legislator and highly involved in the Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, wrote an editorial on the Say Anything blog talking about how they were open to the idea. Have you heard anything about whether they've made a decision to voice a stronger opinion on it or anything the other direction?
Yeah, and I read that well-written op-ed from Representative Schneider. And after I got done reading it, it certainly seemed like the Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties was in favor of a special session. I know there are some members that strongly favor it. And I hope that they will continue to have discussions with the governor about going into special session to address some of these needs. And really, that's where the request has to be driven, is from Western North Dakota. You know, I'm very cognizant of the fact that I live in Grand Forks. I mean, I very much want to do right by Western North Dakota, but we shouldn't go into special session just because some guy from Grand Forks says so. But I do think we should listen to people like Brad Beckdahl, who's a city commissioner from Williston, someone who's been a gracious host to me and my legislative colleagues when we've been up there for our meetings. Mayor Koser as well has also hosted us on tours and has called for a special session. And leaders throughout that part of the state are saying that this is something that's necessary. And so I hope that the oil and gas producing counties will fully embrace the notion of a special session. I assume that they're, doing a lot behind closed doors to work with the governor to make sure that they have their needs addressed, and I appreciate their input on this.
And I believe Brad Beckdahl that you mentioned is actually running for the legislature himself as a Republican, which is also an interesting thing that's been going on up there. And with about a minute or so left in this segment, have you been hearing a lot of chatter about how much dissent there is amongst Republicans up in the northwestern region of the state regarding the inaction of the Republican legislature to do anything?
I think this isn't necessarily a partisan issue, and I regret if it's become that way to some people. It really isn't. I mean, to me, North Dakota is one big small town with long streets. The fact that these challenges are happening a couple hundred miles down Highway 2 from where I live, that shouldn't be an issue to people in eastern North Dakota. We should be able to stand with western North Dakota elected leaders to address these needs. To the extent that Republicans are disagreeing with Republicans, I think that's bound to happen. I don't want to make this some sort of wedge for partisan purposes, but I would like to see a favorable response to this very public debate that we're having about whether or not to have a special session. So if I can bring some pressure to bear to solve these challenges, at least in part, I'm happy to do it. But the end goal here is benefiting western North Dakota. It's not a political benefit that we're seeking here.
And we'll be right back after the break here. We are speaking with State Senate Minority Leader Mac Schneider about the issues in the Bakken related to state funding, and we will be right back after a few commercials. Welcome back to Policy Matters. My name is Dustin Goverlow. We are speaking with North Dakota State Senate Minority Leader Mac Schneider out of Grand Forks. And Mac, we talk about the infrastructure needs up in the northwest part of the state, dealing with the oil boom. What are you hearing from local officials when they get in the specifics? What are they really looking for rather than just more money out of Bismarck? What are the genuine issues that they are dealing with that they do not have mechanisms to fund themselves and that are not fundable through the current formula?
Yeah, if you look at Watford City, there's an excellent piece of journalism that I think ran in the Dickinson Press several weeks ago, and the needs really just run the gamut, from education to housing to public safety to roads, and I don't see a change in the revenue sharing of the oil production tax as a cure-all for those, but certainly the share that they get in return for what they send to Bismarck is completely inequitable. In McKenzie County, there's over $1 billion worth of oil revenue if you count both the extraction tax and the production tax generated in 2012. McKenzie County's return on that was about 7%. And so that's, I think, by any objective measure, very unfair. So rather than doing things the way we've done them since the boom started, which is collecting all of this oil production and oil extraction tax revenue, having it sit there in a sleepy fund in Bismarck till the legislature comes back 2 years later, then going through the appropriations process, and by then having seen the problems multiply and change, why not let these communities keep a greater share of that oil production tax right off the top? To me, that just makes perfect sense. And if we provide too much, that's something that can be readjusted. But so far, we've been woefully short of meeting the needs in western North Dakota. And it's time now for us to realize that this boom is going to have legs, and that the challenges that we're going to see are challenges from abundance, not scarcity, like we have throughout our state's history. So it's going to take a change in mentality. It's going to take a change in policy. And if we can address that in a special session, we should. And if we're not perfect, that's all right. We'll be in session again very soon. But that is the heart of the matter here, is allowing these communities to keep a greater share of the production tax. And certainly not a cure-all, but it'll go a long ways to addressing these needs as they arise rather than later through the appropriations process.
What is your reaction when you hear about things like up in Williston with their recreation center, where they spent nearly $100 million to build a rec center, and then on the flip side, they are saying they lack the bonding capacity to build a water treatment facility? Isn't it kind of ironic that they can build a rec center that has a massive pool but not have a mechanism in place to actually provide the water that their citizens need?
Well, I'm not in a position to second-guess Williston's budgeting. And to me, if there are people in Williston who feel that their elected leaders are not prioritizing between a water treatment plant and a fitness facility, they can take that to the polls. I see the oil production tax revenue sharing issue as separate from that. The issue to me is, what is their fair share to address these needs? And then locally elected leaders will be held accountable by the newcomers and longtime residents who call Williston and Montford City and Tioga and Stanley home. So state policymakers, and one who lives in Grand Forks, I'm not here to just make presumptions about how Williston should or shouldn't spend their money. That's up to the people of Williston ultimately. I do think as a state policymaker, we need to ensure that they get their fair share of that oil revenue because they are under tremendous strain. And it's difficult to meet the challenges of the boom by the normal revenue streams that these cities and municipalities and political subdivisions have. Property taxes. Tough to levy property taxes on a Winnebago in the Walmart parking lot, for example. So this is about fair share rather than someone from Grand Forks going through the books of the Williston City Commission and figuring out whether they're spending their money correctly. I think that's a decision for the people of Williston.
Do you think that there should be a mechanism in place if the formula is changed to something near what you would like to see for the legislature to have oversight on the money that the state is sending down through the formula, not necessarily the self-generated local revenue, but the dollars coming from the state? Should the legislature have any role in ensuring that those dollars are really going to what the locals are asking the dollars to be put towards?
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. And I think the legislature ultimately is always going to have the last word in terms of how this oil revenue is shared. If we dramatically increase the share of the oil production tax that's going to these oil-impacted communities, and it turns out that the oil-impacted communities are spending their money frivolously, I think that's doubtful. But if that turns out to be the case, I think there are some other state priorities that the legislature is going to see need to be addressed. But I think what we've done thus far, even under the new production formula, we've asked that hub cities who benefit from this increased funding come to the budget section, provide a presentation, and report on precisely how they're using state funds. And I did take in several of those presentations during the last meeting of the budget section, and they were good. And the local leaders were gracious for the state funding that they've received, but they're also very clear that more needs to be done. And so if somehow there comes a time where we've gotten caught up with the needs of the boom, we've even gotten ahead a little bit, we may need to readjust that oil production tax formula in terms of how it's shared. But right now, we're shortchanging western North Dakota. I think that's clear by any fair measure.
What sort of mechanisms do you think should be put in place if the formula is changed to prevent local governments from relying on these dollars in case they start to, dry up later on, whether it's 5 or 10 years down the road? Eventually, this boom is going to level off and start. There's going to be the other side of the hill eventually, whether it's in 5, 10, 20, or 30 years. There's going to be a correction. There always is. That's just the way economics are.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that this does not become another revenue source that is over-relied on the way that property tax have become over-relied on?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I do think in terms of addressing needs, and that's what this is all about. I mean, that's the call for a special session, the call to increase oil-impacted communities' share of the oil production tax. It's all about addressing these critical needs that have arisen. It's not necessarily to substitute for what would normally be paid for with property taxes or sales tax or whatever else. And so I think what's happening now is exceptional. You're seeing just tremendous growth in western North Dakota. I do think at some point this phase of the boom is going to level off, and presumably that will provide an opportunity to keep up with or to catch up with the impacts that we've seen. And so if oil production revenue starts to fall, presumably the impacts from oil exploration and extraction, presumably those impacts will fall too. So hopefully there's kind of a natural proportion to both the needs and the revenue levels, but I do think we're far off right now from these communities in western North Dakota being dependent on oil production tax revenues. They're depending and strained to meet the needs of the boom just with existing revenues and the small share of the production tax that they receive now. So I think long term it's wise to avoid overdependence on any one stream of revenue, but when they're receiving such a small share right now, I think dependence is not probable considering our present circumstances.
And many of the critics of calling for a special session and increasing state spending in the West above the levels that were approved last session point to the lack of manpower, the lack of contractors to do the work, even the lack of gravel to pour cement, and the need to ship that in from out of state, and all of those factors drastically inflating the cost of doing any sort of construction. Do you think that there needs to be a better understanding by both the legislature and local governments as to the situation with the construction business itself and the viability of how realistic it is to put this money into the West and then have it go to work the way it is intended and prevent massive overpaying for products because of the inflation?
Yeah, I don't see how that gets better between now and 2015. And so reasonable people can disagree on the need for a special session, but not having a special session because it's going to cost so much to address these infrastructure needs, I don't see that as a valid reason. To think that magically contractors are going to be working for cut rates in 2015 after the legislature leaves in May, that's just not realistic. So I think this is a problem that unfortunately we're going to have to deal with at least in terms of the coming years, if not longer. And we're faced with the circumstances that we're faced with. It does cost more for construction. It does cost more for gravel. Raw materials are in short supply. That is the environment that we've been forced to work in. And I think as we put off addressing these needs, I think they're only going to get worse, not better.
And, getting to the issue of the property tax discussion, and we've only got a few seconds here in this segment. We'll get more into this after the break. Do you think that there is a push on the property tax side of the discussion at the state level to use some of the oil money to dedicate it towards ensuring that the continued buy down, well, they no longer call them buy downs, but they've integrated into the education policy. Do you think that we will see in the next session more oil money going towards the property tax relief program?
Well, I think we need to be honest with ourselves. The only reason why we've been able to fund property tax relief to the extent that we have, and I certainly think there are better ways to provide property tax relief than the legislature has done it, but the only reason why we have that buy down, or whatever it's called nowadays, is because of the increased revenue that we have secondary to the oil boom. And so that really raises the issue of moral hazard. My district is doing great secondary to the rapid development of our natural resources. We're going to get a new addition to our law school. We're going to get a new addition, or we're going to get a completely new medical school. We just cut the ribbon on a new IT building. Things are great here in Grand Forks, but we have a moral obligation to stand by the people of western North Dakota who are literally paying the price for our prosperity. And so I think we're going to be able to continue the property tax relief that's been funded in the past. I would hope that we would improve upon that by targeting residential homes for deeper property tax cuts. But first things first, let's take care of the goose that laid the golden egg, and more than that, take care of the goose's nest.
We have been speaking with State Senator Max Schneider out of Grand Forks. When we come back, we will talk more about some property tax issues, as well as the overall education funding formula and what the state has been doing in that realm in recent years, kind of touching off of our discussion last week with Nick Archuleta of North Dakota United. We will be right back. Welcome back to Policy Matters. My name is Dustin Goverlow, and today we are speaking with State Senator Max Schneider of Grand Forks. Now, Mac, what we've been seeing over the last several sessions is a dramatic increase in state funding for education, and that started off primarily as an effort to reduce property taxes around the state, or at least attempt to. And those programs that were started in 2007 and 2009 and continued into 2011 get converted into what they call permanent education funding now. And so we have been hearing mixed reviews around the state. Some people say that they are not receiving any relief to speak of because the valuations on their houses are increasing a lot faster than the state is pumping more money into local education. And then we are hearing some on the other end of the spectrum saying that they're getting 20 to 25% reduction in their property taxes, which is roughly what the governor and the majority party in the legislature advertised. Do you think that the current track is sustainable, one, and then two, the right approach?
I think the sustainability of it remains to be seen. Certainly if the commodities markets tanked, our entire budget would be in rough shape. That's just the way things have been set up now. It is very much dependent on oil, very much dependent on ag. And to some extent, that's inescapable. In terms of whether this is the right approach to provide property tax relief, I voted for increasing funding for K-12 education to offset local property taxes. I'm obviously not going to vote against that, but I think we could do much better and provide much deeper property tax relief to those that own their homes by focusing in on property tax relief for North Dakota residents, people who own homes here, and also providing a tax credit to renters. But first, when it comes to providing tax relief for primary residents in North Dakota, there was an interim bill that came out of the 2011-2013 interim before last legislative session. It would have exempted the first $75,000 from the value of a primary residence. And so this isn't something that Walmart or some of the larger businesses in North Dakota would benefit from, but it is something that would be a significant cut for North Dakota homeowners. And because you're only targeting residences with this reduction in valuation or exemption from valuation, it's much more efficient to provide a deeper property tax cut. So the people that I hear complaining about property taxes are the ones in North Grand Forks and in Bismarck and Fargo who own their homes here. We don't want to tax Walmart just for the fun of it, but you can get much farther providing a deeper property tax cut to North Dakota homeowners than you can by buying down everybody's property taxes, which has been the approach in the past. And so I would like to see us step away from our reliance on the buy-down aspect of things. The other problem with that, at least here in Grand Forks, property taxes, the share of property taxes that go to fund K-12 education, they're about 30% now. So you're only working with a small section of the property tax pie. The counties, the cities, they also levy property taxes. You saw a positive step, I thought, and it was an idea that was essentially taken from Jim Dotzenrod in his bill that we introduced last session that provides a state-paid credit, about a 12% credit to offset local property taxes. That makes sense. That's a much better approach than buying down K-12 mill levies across the board. So I think with the resources that North Dakota has, we can provide deeper property tax relief for homeowners. The other thing is it requires focus. Now, the majority last session, what did they come out with out of the gate? It wasn't a well-defined plan to cut property taxes. It was a plan to reduce the oil extraction tax by about 30%. It was a plan to reduce corporate and personal income taxes by $250 million. We had a floor amendment in the Senate that would have taken that $250 million in corporate and personal income tax cuts, turned it right into deeper property tax relief, voted down along party lines. So you can't be everything to everyone. We're very much focused as a Dem and PL caucus on cutting property taxes. It's a big difference between the two caucuses.
It's interesting that you cite the 12.5% credit on the property tax statement to be paid on behalf of the taxpayer or the property owner, because I believe in the end it was what we call the red light district on the Republican side that really forced that through and as being part of it, because the idea of merging the original property tax buy-down program into full education funding, a lot of conservatives did not like that because, well, let's face it, when it comes down to it, if that money ever dries up, being put in a position of cutting education funding is obviously going to be a lot dirtier than cutting property tax relief that probably wasn't long-term sustainable in the first place.
Yeah, politics makes strange bedfellows. Jim Dotzenrod, former chair, actually, of the Senate Finance and Tax Committee back in the 90s, now a leading member of our caucus and of the Senate in general when it comes to tax issues. That was his bill. Let's provide a tax credit to homeowners in North Dakota. That's really what happened at the end of the day during those sleep-deprived hours of day 80/81 when there was quite a bit of chaos. A lot of that could have been avoided if we had just listened to people like Jim early on in the session, or listened to the legislators who came forward with this bipartisan bill that was approved by the interim Finance and Tax Committee. Those bills were voted down early on in the session, and we have this crazy 6-hour period where we're throwing around $100 million appropriations essentially by the seat of our pants. And that's not any way to run a railroad. The end result, I favor that credit, but that should have been more thoroughly considered early on in the session, and I think we would have had a much better product and deeper property tax relief at the end of the day to show for it.
Do you think that the shenanigans that were going on during that last day kind of sent a message to the majority party, or do you think that they just kind of walked away wondering what just happened?
I'm not sure. I remember meeting with Representative Carlson, Senator Holmberg, Senator Wardner. All of us went to a legislative management meeting after day 80 of the legislative session. I think it was about 6 in the morning when we got out of there. I'm not sure the majority was feeling much at all. I know we weren't. But I think it's clear to the educators and to the education advocates that watched that clown show the last day of the session, where the K-12 funding bill was defeated and then essentially reincorporated into another bill. That is just Exhibit A when it comes to the lack of a plan to address property tax relief. Instead of coming forward with the extraction tax cut, they should have come forward with a clearly defined plan to cut property taxes, not something to be dealing with just willy-nilly on day 80/80.5 of the session.
And now having about almost a year between us and that, have you gotten any sense of what the goal of that really was, or if they got to the goal that they expected on the Republican side, or was general membership on the Republican side even aware that there was a plan, if there was a plan?
Boy, I don't think there was a plan. And I remember listening to Representative Carlson's speech in favor of killing the K-12 funding bill. And ultimately, I believe it was defeated by a tie vote, and so he was successful in that. But I didn't hear a plan articulated saying that if you defeat this bill, we will implement a state-paid tax credit. I didn't hear any of that. I think it was impulsive. I think it was evidence of procrastination. And so to think that our legislators, who should have clearly heard the warning sirens of the Measure 2 debate in terms of the possibility of eliminating property taxes, to think that the majority would put off until the last day of the legislative session to come up with a plan for property tax relief, it's just irresponsible and not indicative of a group that's focused on governing, or at least focused on the issues that North Dakotans care about most, and there are a few that North Dakotans care about more than property tax relief. So we would do things differently, and I think we'll get a different and better result if we're able to have more partisan balance in the legislature next session.
And with about a minute left here, what is the message that you would like to send the North Dakotans about what you and the Democratic Party are working on for the next session, whether or not there's a special session?
I think two strong parties keeping each other in check is the best assurance of good government that North Dakota can get. And we intend to do our part here as Democrats, and we have done that last legislative session, increasing the fair share of oil revenue for western North Dakota, providing property tax cuts, not cuts to the oil extraction tax, and then planning long-term for the North Dakota that we're going to have after the oil boom, endowing a scholarship to fund, or endowing scholarships, providing for the future, and making permanent investments in our people that don't explode our budget. That's what we're focused on as the Dem and PL party. We're going to reach out a hand to the majority and get some of those things done next session.
Well, thank you for joining us, Senator Schneider. We look forward to hearing more about what might come out of a special session. It will be interesting to see if we get one and whether it is effective. You've been listening to Policy Matters. My name is Dustin Goverlow. And once again, if you would like to contact us, my email address is radio@policymatters.us, or you can visit our website at policymatters.us, or you can call me at my office at 701-390-9231. See you next time.